Okay, let's take a look at this idea of a while loop. A while loop. So we learned about a for loop, and a for loop basically says, hey, I'm going to loop until you tell me to stop looping. A while loop will not. A while loop, if you are not careful with this one, will go on forever until your computer runs out of memory and either your browser crashes, or if you're on an older computer, your computer crashes. So just be very careful with this while loop. This one is very, very important to understand before you actually write one. And the worst case scenario here is, maybe your computer runs out of memory and you just have to give it a reboot. Not the worst thing in the world, but generally your computer just locks up, you give it a reboot, don't run the script again, and you're good to go. So let's look at a while loop's syntax. So basically what's going to happen here is you have a while something is true, do a bunch of stuff in here. It really boils down to something that simple. And so what we could say here is var num is equal to 0. And let's say while number is less than or equal to 1000, we could console.log the num. Now don't run it at this point, because this is going to run forever. We didn't do anything with number. In the for loop we did, we automatically incremented it. In a while loop, we didn't. So we have to manually put this in at the end of our loop or at the beginning of a loop. Somewhere in there, we need to increment number. So we could say number is equal to number plus 1, or we could just do num plus plus. And that will give us 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so on and so on. So let's go ahead and give this a shot. And when I refresh this, this is going to console log the number 1,000 times. And sure enough, there it is. And I can just keep scrolling, and you see that there is, in fact, 1,000 in there. Now, when would you ever want to use something like this? Well, what we could do is we could ask the user for some sort of input. So let's say var num is going to be number, and we're going to prompt the user for a number. Give me a number. And then we're going to cast that prompt, whatever that's going to be, to a number. And then let's switch this out, and let's say var starting num is equal to 0, not 9, 0. And let's get rid of this. Let's change this out. Let's do starting num is less than num. And so what we're saying is always start at the number 0 and go until it reaches whatever the user says. Maybe it's number 10. Maybe it's the number 10 million. It's going to run until it hits that number. Also, we have to be careful here because this is the number that we're trying to increment. So while this is true, we need to go ahead, swap those out. So basically what this is saying is 0, maybe the user typed in 1,000. Is 0 less than 1,000? Yes, it is. So execute. 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, then 5, 1,000 times until it gets to, is 1,000 less than 1,000? It is not. This is false. And so it stops executing. Let's go ahead and give this a shot. Move this over so it can ask me for a number. Refresh. Give me a number. I'm gonna roll my dice and I'm gonna say 89. And it console logged 89 because I did the wrong one here. If you're looking at your screen going, Caleb, you forgot to change one. You're right, I did. This console logged 89 because that was the number I entered. I wanted to console log the starting number, the number that's going to constantly increment. So let's go ahead and give this a shot. Let's pretend that first one didn't happen. And number 89 is, there it is. Starts at 0, goes down to 88. Remember, computers start counting at the number 0. Although if we wanted to, we could say this is going to be 1, is less than or equal to, let's go ahead and refresh, 89. And this will give us numbers 1 through 89. There it is. Last number is 89, first number is 1. And so that's a while loop. Now in modern JavaScript, you see these a lot less than you used to. Back in the day, these were everywhere. These are less popular now because for loops and the for each loop, which we'll talk about in the next video, has basically taken over. They're better forms of loops for JavaScript. But you're still going to see this one out there. And if you're wondering, Caleb, where am I going to use a while loop? Well, what if you wanted to create a list of something? So actually, before we move on to that next lesson, let's go ahead and create another example in here. So I'm going to comment this out so it doesn't use any computer resources of mine. And let's create a list. So we've got ul class is equal to JS list. /ul, and when I refresh my page, we see nothing in here. And in fact, let's do this. H1 list. So we have a list in here, but there's no list items, so we're going to need to actually create some list items. So let's use query selector to grab this item. So var list, or rather ul, is equal to document.query selector. There's only one, so we can use this one. Let's go ahead and create some HTML for this. So var HTML is equal to a blank string. And then let's loop through this a certain number of times. While something is true, HTML is equal to HTML plus li, whatever the number is going to be. So let's just call it num, I guess. Could be anything. We haven't got that far yet, so just bear with me. /li. And so now we're just writing a bunch of HTML in here. We're saying, hey, starts off with nothing, put an li in there. Second iteration comes in, says there's one li, put another one in there. Third iteration comes in, there's already two li's in there, put another one in there. So let's go ahead and ask the user for a number. Var num is equal to, let's cast this as a number, prompt, give me a number. And we're going to say the starting num is going to be 0. And while that starting num is less than the number, let's go ahead and let's actually start this at 1 so we can count like humans, not like computers. So starting number is going to be 1, and as long as this number is less than or equal to whatever the number the person gives you is, this will continue to run. Remember, this needs to be incremented manually, so let's manually increment that. And at this point, nothing's going to happen. We just loaded up this variable called HTML with a bunch of HTML. Now we have to go ahead in our UL and actually add this into our document object model. So let's go ahead, type .ul, inner HTML is equal to whatever the HTML variable is, refresh, give me a number. Okay, let's do 42. And again, it just says 42 over and over again. Let's go ahead and let's type iteration. Iteration is going to be whatever that starting number is. Let's try this again, number 42, and there it is, iteration 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, all the way down to 42. And so a while loop does actually have a place in the JavaScript world. It's just a little less popular these days, but it is still very good to know about. You don't have to do anything in this video. Let's move on to the next one where we're going to work with some of the document object models, and we're going to use this thing called a for each loop, which is really, really useful.